International Media TV, television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
So I used to teach kindergarten, so I'm going to do it again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. And I won't, I know you don't know who I am, so I won't be like, you didn't say Miss Davis. So, but thank you all so much for being here this evening. We have such a wonderful opportunity to meet these great creators and authors and the inspiration for the March trilogy. I have the great honor to just kind of open us up and get us going. I am actually an alum. I got my MPA here at USF. Very excited about that. I work closely with Dr. Mary Wardell Garaduzzi, who runs the Diversity Engagement Office here at USF. And I am on the advisory board for the McCarthy Center and Engage SF, which is also here. So I always try to start something off to kind of get us in focus. And so before we invite Father Paul up to do welcome and Dean Kumashiro to introduce our speakers, I'm going to ask Sarah Williams to come and sing a song that I really feel like represents what we're celebrating here today. We are celebrating the gifts of literature, the gifts of writing, the gift of art, and the way that they symbolize and share information about a movement and empowering people. And we're so grateful for these people to be here today to share their gifts. And I want really the challenge and the charge is for all of us to be thinking about what are our gifts and what do we do to give back and to change our communities, which I think is really what the story is hoping to inspire people to do. So I will introduce Sarah Williams, who will sing, and then immediately after that, Father Paul Fitzgerald will come up. Thank you.
The room grew still as she made her way to Jesus. She stumbles through the tears that made her blind. She felt such pain, saw the smoke in anger, heard folks whisper, there's no place here for her kind. Still on she came through the shade that flushed her face, until at last she knelt before his feet. And though she spoke no words, everything she said was heard as she poured her love for the Master from her bosom of alabaster. And I come to pour my praise on him like oil from Mary's alabaster box. Don't be angry if I wash his feet with my tears and dry them with my hair. alabaster box. I can't forget the way life used to be. I was a prisoner to the sin that had me bound. And I spent my days pouring my life without measure into a little treasure box. I thought I found, until the day when Jesus came to me and healed my soul with the wonders of His touch. So now I'm giving back to Him all the praise He's worthy of. I've been forgiven, that's why I love Him so much. I've come to pour my praise on Him like oil from Mary's alabaster box. So don't be angry if I wash His feet with my tears and dry them with my hair. With my hair, you were there the night He found me. You did not feel what I felt when He wrapped His loving arms around me. You don't know the cost of the oil. No, you don't know the cost of my praise. You don't know the cost of the oil in my alabaster box.
Thank you, Sarah. You touched our heart. It is my great honor to welcome all of you here this evening to the University of San Francisco to encounter a living legend whose insights and wisdom are as much in demand today as they were years ago on that bridge in Selma. The Honorable John Lewis, hero of the American Civil Rights Movement, has been called, quote, one of the most courageous persons the Civil Rights Movement ever produced, and the conscience of the Congress. Congressman Lewis Congressman Lewis, the child of Alabama sharecroppers and a son of the Jim Crow South, has dedicated his life to agitating for equal justice and protection through nonviolent means. Born in Troy, Alabama, John Lewis attended a segregated public school and went on to earn his Bachelor of Arts in Theology and Philosophy and Theology at Fisk University, and did his graduate work at the American Baptist Theological Seminary. At 25 years of age, John Lewis was central to the planning of the Selma to Montgomery protest march in 1965, which saw one of the most violent, brutal, and ugly police crackdowns on peaceable assembly in the entire history of the civil rights movement. Representative Lewis has prepared his story for a new generation with this great literary work, March, a series of graphic novels co-written with Andrew Aden, his longtime congressional staffer, and illustrations with their close collaborator, Nate Powell. My understanding is that volumes 1, 2, and 3 are currently 1, 2, and 3 on the New York Times bestsellers list for graphic novels. Congratulations. Your purchases here this evening may change the order. I don't know. This trilogy of books tells the story of Lewis's life as a child, beginning that journey in Troy, Alabama, to become a leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a friend and ally to his mentor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a representative of the 5th Congressional District of Georgia, and a committed practitioner of peaceful means to ensure civil rights, indeed human rights, for all persons. The fight for freedom and equality unquestionably continues today, with March in classrooms and throughout conversations, and through conversations with today's young people, a new generation can grasp the history of the struggle for civil rights. The March trilogy has topped the bestseller list and from the first printing of Book 1. An excerpt from March, Book 2 by John Lewis and Andrew Aden with illustrations by Nate Powell. Quote, Dr. King made plain all our hopes, our aspirations, everything we sought through the beatings and the blood, through the triumphs and the failures, everything we dared to imagine about a new America, a better America, in which each of God's children can live in a society that makes love its highest virtue. Close quote. Congressman Lewis, you are most welcome here, and you are among friends. The University of San Francisco was fully integrated, welcoming African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Latinos, and whites in all of our academic and co-curricular programming by 1930. Those damn liberal Jesuits. Today we are the 7th most diverse university in the United States, according to the U.S. News. And this is diversity in every possible way you could imagine. The quest for racial justice and for the full respect of every human person is woven into our mission, our identity, and our values. For that reason, Congressman, and for all the dangers that our society is facing today, from bigots and bullies, we invite you to teach us anew what God demands of us: courage, wisdom, and loving service for the common good. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dean Kevin Kumashiro, Dean of our School of Education and a nationally recognized scholar on gender justice, racial justice in education, to introduce our speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to President Fitzgerald, thanks to Mary Wardell and the USF Office of Diversity Engagement Community Outreach, and of course Cheryl Davis and Collective Impact for organizing this incredible event and inviting me to introduce our speakers, John Lewis, Andrew Aden, Nate Powell, and their amazing work of art. The late African-American poet laureate Gwendolyn Brooks asks, does man love art? Man visits art, but squirms. Art hurts. Art urges voyages, and it is easier to stay at home. I loved reading about how, as a teenager, Congressman John Lewis came across the comic book called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story, an attempt by civil rights leaders at the time to teach a whole new generation about the power of nonviolence as the central frame for protest and for resistance. Inspiring and guiding John Lewis, who was active even as a young teenager, we then see him becoming one of the original freedom riders to challenge segregation, one of the big six civil rights movement's leaders to organize the 1963 March on Washington, was chair of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, during which time they launched the Freedom Summer, voter registration efforts, the Selma Montgomery March, and Freedom Schools. It was under John Lewis's leadership that SNCC would come to be regarded by many as one of the most radical and revolutionary elements of the civil rights movement, with more young people, more grassroots organizing, and more democratically run governance. And this book, this comic book, continues to inspire today, including the inspiration for the graphic novel that we'll be talking about, the graphic novel trilogy, March. March, a graphic novel that is teaching and inspiring and guiding a whole new generation about the power of young people, the power of organizing, and the power of movement building. Art invites us to see and to feel and to know in ways that everyday conversation does not and cannot. Art can touch and move us deeply, and not surprisingly, it often figures centrally in political struggles. The late German poet Bertolt Brecht tells us, art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. Today we need art more than ever. Around the world we see wars. Around our nation we hear the rhetoric in the presidential election. Even in our own communities we see pervasive violence and poverty. And we see the amplification of the demonizing and the persecution of human diversity. We sometimes in this context feel numb to injustices and fearful of even imagining alternatives. In other words, we're not often enough questioning common sense. Hence the need for this book and its connection to education. Because education, like art, is not about conforming to the world as it is. Education and art are about imagining and creating the world as it could be. And this is why art and education is so scary. This is why teachers are among the first to be persecuted in political crackdowns. It's why, for example, the 3 organizers who were murdered by the Klan in 1964, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, were Freedom School teachers. And it's why art, by the way, happens to be the very first thing to be cut in today's school reforms. Defining the decades of leadership of John Lewis is a vision that the world can be better and that we can get there by seeing our solidarity. You've heard from President Fitzgerald that John Lewis is often referred to as the conscience of Congress. John Lewis, after all, is considered by many to be among the most liberal and progressive in Congress, seeing and insisting on the interconnections of racial justice with institutionalized poverty, imperial wars, struggles for human rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, health care, and as we saw recently, that introduced Congressman Lewis to a whole new generation, leading Congress in a sit-in to raise awareness of and push for gun control. John Lewis is the U.S. representative for Georgia's 5th District. Let me introduce to you some of the other contributors and panelists. His longtime congressional aide, Andrew Iden, is John Lewis's digital director and policy advisor. He is the co-author of the books who skillfully took John Lewis's experiences and history, translating it into an incredibly compelling, moving, and educational story. Andrew, by the way, earned his master's from Georgetown and wrote his thesis on the history and impact of the historic comic book Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. The books are illustrated by Nate Powell, called by Booklist magazine, quote, the most prodigiously talented graphic novelist of his generation. His awards include the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Novel and 4 great graphic novels for teens from the American Library Association. John Lewis is an inspiration to generations of us. And these books will help him to become an inspiration to generations more. Please help me welcome Congressman John Lewis.
Thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. Thank you. President Fitzgerald, thank you for your kind words. Thank each and every one of you for welcoming us to this great university, to this special place. It is true that I didn't grow up in a very big city like Los Angeles, or San Francisco, or San Diego, Washington, D.C., or New York, or Detroit, or Atlanta. It is true that I grew up on a farm in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, or about 10 miles outside of a little place called Troy. It is true that my father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But in 1944, when I was only 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4. How many of you remember when you were 4? What happened to the rest of us? My father had saved $300, and a man sold him 110 acres of land for $300. We still own that land today. On this farm, we raise a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. Now, do any of you know anything about raising chicken? Some of you? Well, okay. Why don't we compare notes then? On the farm, it was my responsibility to care for the chickens. And I fell in love with raising chickens like no one else could raise chicken. And we tell the story in March, Book 1. When the setting hen was set, I had to take the fresh eggs and mark them with a pencil and place them under the setting hen and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. Some of you may be saying, John Lewis, why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen will get on that same nest, and there will be some more fresh eggs. And you have to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. Do you follow me? You don't follow me, really. And when the little chicks were hatched, I would fool these setting hen. I would cheat on these setting hens. And when I look back on it, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. It was not the most democratic thing to do or the moral thing to do, to cheat on these setting hens. I would take these little chicks and give them to another hen, or put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own, get some more fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 weeks. It was not right. It was not right to do. But I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive hatcher or incubator from the seasonal store. Now, some of you may not be old enough, all of the young people, all of the young children. You've probably never seen a seasonal book catalog. Some of you know about it? Not in California. It's a big book, heavy book. It's a thick book. Some people will call it the worst book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. So I just kept on wishing. But as a little boy, about 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be a minister. Father, I wanted to be a minister. So I would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard. And my brothers and sisters and cousins were lined outside of the chicken yard, but they would help make up the audience and the congregation with the chickens. And I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to in the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. And some of the chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Well, that's enough of that story. When I would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. To go downtown on a Saturday afternoon to the theater, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. All of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? And my mother would say, boy, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, in the 10th grade, I heard of Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on the old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I got in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. I was so inspired by the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of the great teacher, so inspired by Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., the Little Rock Nine. With some of my brothers and sisters in 1956, we went down to the public library, a little town of Troy, trying to get a library card, trying to check out some books. We were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for coloreds. I never went back to that public library until July 5th, 1998 for a book signing of my first book, Walking with the Wind. Hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up. Had a wonderful book signing. We had a wonderful reception, food, something to drink. At the end of the program, they gave me a library card. By this time, I'm in the Congress. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made in laying down the burden of race. In 1957, we tell this story. 17 years old, I write a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I wanted to attend this little college only 2 miles from my home called Troy State College, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript, never heard a word. So I sent a letter to Dr. King. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I've been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee. An uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had. Gave me a Foot Locker, one of these big upright trunks that have the, I guess you call them curtains, the drawers, that you can open up and bring back together. I put everything that I own in that Foot Locker except those chickens and took a Greyhound bus to Nashville. And after being in Nashville for about 3 weeks, I told one of my teachers that I had been in contact with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this teacher informed Dr. King that I was there. And Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, I boarded a bus. I traveled from Troy to Montgomery. And a young lawyer who was also a minister by the name of Fred Gray, who had been a lawyer for Rosa Parks and for Dr. King and the Montgomery movement, became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and the march from Selma to Montgomery, met me and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, passed by one of Dr. King's friends and one of the leaders of the Montgomery bus boycott, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and ushered me into the church. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared, I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King said, "Are you John Lewis? You're the boy from Troy?" And I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name, and he started calling me the boy from Troy. I continued to study in Nashville, and it was in the city of Nashville, under the influence of a young Methodist minister by the name of James Lawson, who's now retired in Los Angeles, who taught us the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. He taught us the life and story of Gandhi. He taught us about Thoreau and civil disobedience. And it was there that we prepared black and white high school students and college students to sit in. We'd be sitting down in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion at a lunch counter in a restaurant, waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on us, put lighted cigarettes out in our hair or down our backs, pull us off the lunch counter stool. And then we heard that if we continued to sit in, we would be arrested and be taken to jail. I wanted to be, I guess, fresh, some students used to say, or sharp, or clean. And I wanted a new suit if I were going to go to jail. I had very little money, so I went to a used men's store in downtown Nashville and bought a suit, and a vest came with it, a used suit. I paid $5 for it. If I still had that suit today, I probably could sell it on eBay for a lot of money. The first time I got arrested, I felt free. I felt liberated. I felt like I crossed over. So during the 60s, I was arrested 40 times. And since being in the Congress, I've been arrested 5 more times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. Because my philosophy is very simple. If you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation, a mission, and a mandate to stand up and do something. Speak up, speak out, or find a way to get in the way. It is our hope, it is our hope, it is our prayers that somehow, in some way, another generation of young people, and people not so young, will say something like, "We're not going to take it anymore." That we will be prepared to march, be prepared to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, to help redeem the soul of America and create the beloved community, where we can respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. Just think, and I'm going to cut it off very soon, because these 2 smart young men, they don't believe me. I want them to speak. But just think that in 1961, I was 21 years old, had all of my hair a few pounds lighter. But in 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, black people and white people couldn't be seated together on a bus, traveling from the nation's capital, from Washington, D.C., through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We were on our way to New Orleans to test a decision of the United States Supreme Court. And we wanted to change that. Along the way, we were beaten, arrested, and jailed. But I'll never forget that on May 9th, 1961, my seatmate, young white man, the 2 of us got off a Greyhound bus and tried to enter a so-called white waiting room. Several young men, members of the Klan, attacked us and left us lying in a pool of blood at the Greyhound bus station. May 9, 1961. Local police officials came up, wanted to know whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. We come with peace, love. We believe in the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Several years later, to be exact, in February '09, two men came to my office, one in his 70s, one in his 40s. The young man in his 70s said to me, "Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the people that beat you at the Greyhound bus station in Rock Hill during the Freedom Ride. I want to know, will you forgive me? Will you accept my apology?" And the son started crying. He started crying. And I said, "Sir, I forgive you. I accept your apology." They hugged me. I hugged them back. And the three of us cried together. That is the power of the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. To create a sense of community, a sense of one family. Because in the final analysis, we all live in the same house, not just the American house, but the world house. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say from time to time, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools. The late A. Randolph put it another way. Maybe our foremothers and our forefathers all came to this great land in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And we must look out for each other. So it doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. Doesn't matter whether we're straight or gay. We're one people, one family. We all live in the same house. And we must somehow come together and save this little planet, save this little piece of real estate for generation yet unborn. I tell my colleagues from time to time, we have a right to know what is in the food we eat. We have a right to know what is in the water we drink. We have a right to know what is in the air we breathe. I thought, March 7, 1965, 51 years ago, when I was being beaten and trampled by horses, being tear gassed with 600 other people, that I was going to die on that bridge. I thought I saw death. But somehow, the grace of the Almighty kept me here. And I plan to run on. Not in any way tied. I'm going to run and keep running. As long as breath is in my body, with the help of individuals like these two young men, we're going to tell the story of hope, stick-to-itness, of faith. So I said to you, don't get weary. Keep the faith. And never hate, for hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The way of love is a much better way. We can create the beloved community. We can redeem the soul of America. And if we get it right here in America, maybe we can serve as a model for the rest of the world. Thank you very much. Read March. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3.
How do you follow that? My name is Andrew Iden. I serve as Digital Director and Policy Advisor in the Congressional Office, and I'm the co-author of March. We gotta adjust this for... the folks of my stature. You know, I look around this room and there's some pretty distinguished folks, but I want to single one out. Gideon, age 8, where are you? Gideon? Hello, Gideon.
How you doing?
I understand you enjoy March. Well, I wanted you to know something. I wrote March for you and your colleagues. I gave my 20s to this idea. I gave everything I had. My dog climbs in my suitcase every time I try and leave. She's so mad at me. But I did it for you. And I want you to come back and find me in 20 years with a book and ask me for a blurb, and you will get it. All right, Gideon, promise me that? Thank you. I'm not kidding. That's really why I put everything I had into this. I was raised by a single mom. My father left when I was 3, and I thought it was my fault for the longest time. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I turned to comics because I needed heroes. I needed to see justice on the page. I needed to see someone to look up to. I needed to see people who had power because I felt powerless. And so my comic habit grew and grew, and here we are. It actually all started in 2008. I was in the congressman's re-election campaign serving as press secretary, and it was coming down to the end of it, and folks were starting to talk about what they were going to do afterwards. And they gave very serious responses. Some folks were going to go see their parents. Some folks were going to go to the beach. I said I was going to a comic book convention. And as you can imagine, they laughed at me except for one person. And I heard this. He said, "Don't laugh. There was a comic book during the Civil Rights Movement, and it was very influential." It was John Lewis standing up for me as he stood up for so many. And I went home that night, and I looked up this comic book. It was called Martin Luther King, The Montgomery Story. I read it online. It was beautiful. 16 pages, including the covers. Sort of that studio house style of the 50s. Nobody really knew anything about it. Nobody knew who made it. But I knew that it inspired John Lewis. And as I thought about it, I said, here I'd spent all summer going all over the city of Atlanta, in the middle of awful Atlanta heat, which, by the way, John Lewis doesn't sweat. It's kind of amazing. I do. And I watched him tell all these kids who otherwise would never have heard the story. I mean, I grew up in Atlanta, and I never heard the story of SNCC. And I watched him tell the story of the sit-ins, of the freedom rides and the March on Washington, the story of the Freedom Summer in Selma. And I thought, you know, why doesn't John Lewis write a comic book? Probably the only person ever to think that and to that point. And so I go to work the next day. And it's you know, it's 2008, right? Remember, this is Barack Obama sweeping through the Democratic primaries for the first time. Everyone is looking at the world differently. And we're starting to talk about, well, how do we reach young people with the movement? How do we teach them about what John Lewis did? And I was that guy who said, excuse me, I think you should write a comic book. You want to see some funny faces? You say that. But I really believed it with all my heart. And so when the congressman said, well, maybe, which if you ever work in politics is a very nice way of saying no, I didn't give up on that idea. I kept asking, and finally he turned to me one day and he said, okay, I will do it, but only if you read it with me. And that moment changed my life. We spent the next 5 years working at night, working on weekends, working every spare moment we had. I didn't go out. I haven't seen a party since Bush was in office. nose in there, didn't you? But I had a day job. I decided I was going to go to grad school. That was a masochistic act. And I used that opportunity to write my graduate thesis on the history of Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story. Because I wanted a proof of concept. If I was going to be that crazy guy, I was going to prove it worked before I ever set foot on the playing field. And it did. And we found out Dr. King actually helped edit that comic book. Does that not blow your mind? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., comic book editor. It gave me that vital morsel of hope to get through those days when everybody was laughing at me. When everybody's like, what are you doing? You're spending all your time working on a comic book. You're so weird. I never believed it. I never let it set in. Because I believed that we had to do everything we possibly could to tell John Lewis's story. He's the hero we all need. We're living in a world right now where things are being said that make people scared. It's meant to intimidate them and to keep them from sticking up for themselves. You might not have recognized me because I grew a beard. And I grew a beard because of those things that were being said. My father was a Muslim immigrant, off the boat. That's why nobody can pronounce my last name. So thank you, Dean, who got it right. But when I became a teenager, my mother would always ask me, did you shave today? I don't want you looking much like your dad. Don't make it hard for yourself. Don't put it out there that you're the child of a Muslim. And so when Donald Trump started saying those things, I felt like I'd done something wrong. Again. But this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. So I grew a beard. It's not a political statement. It's about sensitizing people. It's a nonviolent act. It's making nonviolence a way of living. More and more on the Hill, people will sort of go along with these things. And I wanted to sensitize to them who it is they're really talking about. These are people who come up to me and say, you know what? Will you help me write a graphic novel? I think Ronald Reagan really needs it. Fine, I will have coffee with you. But you need to know who it is you're asking. And when you say out there, we can't let Muslim immigrants into this country, you're saying I'm not welcome. And I think I've given everything I can give to try and help make this country stronger by telling John Lewis's story. So I grew a beard, and that's why. You know, there's something in this country called the 9-word problem. Most high school students graduate knowing only 9 words about the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and I have a dream. That's it. And I get it. I grew up in Atlanta. Congressman Lewis has been my congressman since I was 3 years old. And yet, that's about the sum total of what I was taught. So today, when the superintendent of San Francisco Unified stood up and said that March was going to be added to every social studies classroom in the district, I tried not to show up, I got a little teary. We're changing that, one school district at a time. New York, another one outside Philadelphia. Schools in more than 40 states have already adopted. But I believe here in the Bay Area, it's particularly important. Because this generation is a generation of digital natives. They grew up on the internet. This is in many ways the cradle of the internet. And if we're going to speak to them, if we're going to show them the lessons of the movement, how to be nonviolent, how to stand up for themselves, we have to do it in their language. And the internet is a visual language. So we may be the first graphic novel in these classes, but we will certainly not be the last if you want to reach them. And so I'm so grateful for you guys to have us here. Where do I think these student activists should start? Because we need it. We need a generation of student activists. Right? There are fundamental problems in this country. Oftentimes, these are problems that already existed, but because of technology, we're able to see them clearly for the first time. Or at least the people who didn't want to admit that they were problems can see them clearly for the first time. So where do we start? I think we have to start with student loans. I'm not saying any other problem is less important. I'm just saying that if we get rid of student debt, then we can create an activist generation once more. Let me put this another way. When John Lewis got married in 1969? 68. But it was December of 68, right? Okay, I'm not that far off. And the wedding announcement in the LA Times, written by Jack Nelson, right? Read, Lillian Miles to wed unemployed political activist John Lewis. People who are ahead of their time pay a price. And we have to lift the burden of debt so that this generation is free to pay that price for us. I'm a lucky guy right now. I'm here with you talking March. And it's not hot. So let me tell you one more story about my upbringing in Atlanta, where it was very hot. I went to kind of a preppy southern high school. I got a scholarship starting in the 4th grade. And I had an English teacher. Like I said, I was a comic nerd. I would have my comics out. I would bring them with me. I'd be reading something. So one day I had them out on my desk at school. And my English teacher came by and she saw them. She said, no, let me have those. You can't have those out. Those aren't real books. I never forgot that, especially when I went back to my high school with Congressman Lewis and had a wonderful conversation with that very same teacher about her experiences teaching our graphic novels. And I say this, I do not mean this as a form of comeuppance to the teacher. I believe she's doing the Lord's work. But I say it as an example of the power of an idea whose time has come and the brief period in which change is possible. So I ask all of you, join us. March. Thank you.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Nate Powell. I'm the artist on March. Thanks everybody for being here. And as an aside, I just want to say, we've probably spoken together maybe like 120 times or something. And I'd say that was top 3 for both of y'all. So y'all were on fire tonight. I want to recognize that. That was very satisfying for me to listen to and watch. Well, anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Okay, so I'm from Arkansas. I see some of my old and beloved friends from Arkansas here, so it's fantastic to see y'all again, and up the punks. I also spent some of my elementary school years living in Montgomery, Alabama, and my parents are baby boomers from northern Mississippi. So growing up as a kid in the 80s in Alabama, I learned a very basic working knowledge of the civil rights movement, as a 7 or 8-year-old can. Just key figures, key moments from my parents, from their personal experiences, their historical recollections, but it was always kind of peppered with this exception at the end of every story or every anecdote. It would always be like, oh, but it was a different time. Like, I just want to make sure I punctuate this, noting that this is not the world we live in. It was a different time, a different era. And I might have been 7 or 8, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it, but something about that didn't add up in terms of what the connotation was. And I would watch this grainy black and white footage and black and white photography of these events growing up, and I could understand on a conscious level what was happening, but there's something about the footage itself that added this veneer of unreality to it, where it didn't seem like quite the same world that I currently occupied, even though this was, in many cases, the same city where I was living, sometimes just divided by, 10 or 15 years. Oh yeah, it is a good ringtone, I must admit. It's a bold choice. A bold choice. We can all agree on that. Well done. So there's this level of unreality. So there was this veneer of abstraction to a lot of the documentation of this era that I was learning about. And really, that's something that I carried with me, well into adulthood, not realizing that there was this sort of barrier to understanding that this was happening in continuity. In a lot of ways, that was something that wasn't resolved until I really started working on March. In many cases, on a personal level, March became a reckoning of sorts. Now, I've been making comics for 26 years. I've been publishing them for 24 years, started in 9th grade. And really, up until 5 or 6 years ago, I had this somewhat snooty position regarding the work that I would do, where I'm like, I'm never going to think about or anticipate who may be reading my book at some point in the future. I need to let the work speak for itself. I'm just going to make the weird books that I make, and magically they will be printed, and then magically they will just wind up on shelves, and then magically people will read them and absorb them however they may. It wasn't until I think March Book 1 really rolled out and I started having conversations and meeting with teachers, especially who had brought their entire classes to meet Congressman Lewis and to hear what we had to say. Librarians, understanding that teachers and librarians are, in a very real way, gatekeepers of the information that we receive as kids and as adults, and that there's a process, there's a level of risk involved, even on a professional level. And it was the kind of thing where I took for granted that, I was like, topically, what a neutral thing, this gripping tale, this first-person account of the civil rights movement. And it wasn't until we were moving into Book 2 that I had conversations with my local comic shop owner, where I live now in southern Indiana, involving a middle school librarian who had come up from the very southern tip of the state with a budget to buy graphic novels for her class. And over 3 days, she kept just not asking questions about March or mentioning it or waffling on it, and eventually he kind of confronted her about it. He was like, well, what about March? It's kind of a no-brainer if you're shopping for your middle school library. And she was like, you don't understand. If I buy March, and if I put it on my shelves, I will receive enough parental complaints that I will lose my job. And that was a real eye-opener for me, both in understanding the breadth of temperament across Middle America, but also really respecting and recognizing the gatekeeper nature of teachers and librarians. And some risks are small, some are larger, but the fact that these are considerations that need to be made. Now we're honored and are working to kind of rise to the challenge as March is being used and read and taught as history, as memoir, as fine art, as entertainment, as literature. And it's gone places we have never anticipated when we set out to make that first book. I think that comics as a medium have gone far, far beyond the need to establish their legitimacy as a form. I still, every few months I'll get like the mandatory newspaper clipping from my mom from the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette that's like, bang, pow, comics aren't for kids. Guess what? They're still not for kids anymore. I'm like, wow, okay, the struggle continues with comics. And we've hopefully, finally blasted out of the confines of superheroes. But at the same time, I really want to stick up for superhero comics. It's really Chris Claremont's 15-year run writing the X-Men that gave me a social conscience in the first place. X-Men combined with the thrash metal band Anthrax, really, like you put them together, and that really set me on a course when I was 12. And so, I want to give some respect for superhero comics being comics. It's all comics. And for many readers, it's amazing to recognize that March may be the first graphic novel they've ever read. And the movement is something that everyone should know about. Congressman Lewis's account, it's moving, it's fascinating, it is transformative. It was transformative for me, and I drew the thing. But this isn't a case of March working despite being a comic. It's comics. Comics have unique strengths, unique narrative strengths that allow us the kind of intimacy and the kind of immediacy. It allows us to do things that no other medium can do. And in this case, and in many other cases, that lets us truly identify with and empathize with the people and the characters involved. So, if March is the first graphic novel you've read, then we are deeply honored. But don't let it end there. Go get some comics. And it doesn't even really matter. Go visit your local comic shop. Go to your library. It's free. The comic sucks, return it. Go get another comic. Or even just flippantly put things in your Amazon cart late at night because you're bored. It's fine. I encourage you, read some comics. It's amazing, and it has been life-changing for me as a reader and lover of comics. On that tip, March has also been a reckoning in terms of the medium and its visual language. Growing up reading comics, I'm very deeply versed in comics' visual language as it depicts physical violence. And so, in the transition between March Book 1 and Book 2, one of our main focuses was the disproportionate response from the Southern white establishment and from the white supremacist power structure against what are relatively modest gains that the movement had coming from the initial sit-in movements in 59, 60, 61. And so as the violence exponentially increases, and as depictions of that violence, particularly on the freedom rides, needed to be confronted, I was trying to, challenge and subvert the way that violence is depicted in comics, because it would have been really easy to fall into the way I've learned to draw comics my whole life, and basically kind of exploiting real people's pain and real people's deaths. And what happened was surprising, but very simple. In certain cases, I would just make a conscious choice to turn the camera around, to force a reader to, as opposed to just observing the violence or being the recipient of violence, forcing the reader into a position in which they were committing the violence. They were becoming the perpetrators. And even drawing it, I knew what I was getting into consciously, but it actually produced, in the course of a couple of days, a physical repulsion that I haven't felt in a long time when dealing with comic book violence. When it was executed correctly, I feel that March at times reads as horror, and it should. In a lot of ways, it resensitized me to those depictions, and it sort of rehumanized the entire spectrum of human violence and the power dynamics that play out therein, placing faces and context to the perpetrators and to those who endured it. And sort of highlighting that this is something that happened and that continues to happen because of people who you can see on the page, with whom you can identify, who could have been and maybe were your neighbors, your family, and could have been you on both sides of the equation. Another primary focus, particularly moving into the third book, as the movement expands far beyond the limitations of young John Lewis's first-person account, but as the movement swells and evolves, is depicting disagreement, tension, factions developing, both a generational conflict of the younger activist camp, in some ways in a tactical and philosophical revolt against their own predecessors, but also within their own camp, within their own generation, philosophical and tactical differences becoming very heated, very pronounced, resulting in massive splits. And at the same time, most of the time, amidst those disagreements, still coming together in the streets towards the common goal. And I think that we've arrived at a point as a society where it seems almost absurd that people could put aside a particular kind of partisanship to work together towards a common goal despite moderate and sometimes greater than moderate differences. And to me it was very impactful to depict those and try to focus on disagreement, argument, tension as much as possible. Another one of my jobs, I feel, was to allow everyone who reads March to identify with John Lewis and his peers as a 6-year-old, as a 20-year-old. It was very easy for me to do, even just a few days into reading Walking with the Wind, strongly identifying with 6-year-old John Lewis, with the intensity and the gravity and the lens through which he viewed the world. I felt precisely the same kind of intensity and gravity. And I'm a dad now. I have 2 kids. My oldest daughter is 4.5. And I see the same kind of intensity with her. I think that's something that's practically universal with young people, and I think that basically the structures in which we all live do their best to kind of pound that out of us year after year. I think there's a very keen sense of fairness and injustice that all very young people have, and that slowly gets whittled away as we work together just to make it through our lives. So by breaking down these levels of abstraction, by kind of reckoning with that unreality that I faced, my first experiences with cognitive dissonance, with that grainy black and white footage, trying to show to people that, look, here's an example of young people who are thoughtful, dedicated, organized. This is what they achieved as 20-year-olds, not just, even at 20, but especially at age 20, this was achieved. I think back to being a 20-year-old, I'm like, well, what was I doing when I was 20? Or more importantly, what did I think I was doing when I was 20? For those of you older than that, the challenge is, what were you doing when you were 20? If you're younger than that, the question is, what will you do when you are 20? And the good news is, you get to decide that. Thanks, y'all.
You're going to come up here. We're going to have Eric McDonald, the Chief Operating Officer for the United Bay area, who's going to curate the questions that have come through, lead us through a few questions, and then we're going to move to the portion of the program. The Congressman has been so generous with his time. He wants to sign books, and I know many of you would love to have that. And so we're going to have Eric come up here, and so we're going to go very quickly through these questions, and have you respond to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. So we want to get right to it because we're limited on time. And this question just is putting my hand, and I need to ask a question about the question. Imani, where are you, Imani? You You're Imani? This is your question? Okay, I just want to make sure that I got who I'm talking about. Imani, I have to start with your question because it's particularly poignant. Imani says, my name is Imani Ramax. I'm different in many ways. Thank you for fighting for me and my rights. Now it's my turn. How can I help?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. You heard me say when I was a young boy, when I was can you hear me? When I was young, your age, I saw things I didn't like. And I kept saying, why? Why this? Why? My mother said to me, boy, let us grown folks talk. Don't be asking questions like that. But I kept on asking, why? Why this? Why that? And I wanted to do something about it. But I was deeply inspired and moved by reading about Martin Luther King Jr., reading about Rosa Parks, the Little Rock Nine that wanted to desegregate a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. And when I got a chance to do something, I did it. So, as I tried to say earlier tonight, when you see something that is not right, say something, do something. Use social media. If you don't think the president is doing what is right, write him a letter. The president reads so many letters every week, and his staff look at all of the letters. Write your congressperson and say, do something. Do something about gun violence. Do something about seeing that all of our children get an education or have health care. Do something about saving the environment. So just, when you feel it, you've been inspired to do something, just do it. But do it in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion. Nate, Andrew, you want to add anything?
I just wanted to say, I feel like in the I feel like in the, oh, pardon me for chewing gum. I feel like in the context of your tale as a young activist, the reason why so many of the tactics and strategies of the movement worked was because it was coming from a creative and often unexpected place. Once methods are successful, once they've been established, countermeasures are always built. Firewalls are always built to prevent the same thing from happening again. So it's a matter of being able to outthink the traps. It's a matter of being able to outthink the counter-resistance, which sounds kind of like a non-answer, because what I'm really saying is the way to actually make a difference has to do with pure creativity, spontaneity, and organization in a way that no one has thought of before. But that is the truth, which is sort of like the murky middle ground in which new movements and new people emerge.
And sometimes, Nate, you have to catch people off guard. Spontaneity, surprise. People shock. They're sitting in, they're sitting down. When we took seats on the House floor, people didn't know what to do or what to say. They didn't expect. Members of Congress just sitting.
So, Congressman, if I may stay right there on that, not just that moment, but in terms of, the moment that we decide we're going to take action, and stirring in many of us in that moment are many issues, including fear, including a concern that there will be repercussions, right? How did you come to manage your fears and, in the face of anger, not respond angrily and live in that space of way of love, way of peace, way of nonviolence?
Well, I had what I call an executive session with myself. It's like you can have that feeling, but just don't talk back to yourself. And I said, I'm not going to become bitter. I'm not going to become afraid. And something may happen to me, but it's okay. I may get arrested, in jail. I may be beaten. I may be left bloody, but I'm not afraid. Music played a major role in the movement. I've said on occasion, without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. It created this sense of solidarity.
Excellent. So, a question for both you, Congressman, and Andrew in particular. So, growing up, I wanted my voice heard, but I was afraid. Now being black and Muslim, I'm scared of being me. Again, similarly, how do you get over that fear and step out? Let me just commend you for just asking the question, because that's a first step.
The first time I talked about my beard was at San Diego Comic-Con, really, and what happened afterwards was I guess she was about 10, wearing a hijab. She came up to me afterwards and she said, thank you. And I was like, oh, no big deal. And she's like, no, you don't understand. The boys in my grade have been empowered to say some really nasty stuff. And then she proceeded to say some of the most foul things I've heard in a long time. And I'm sitting here watching this 10-year-old be scared in her own class of her classmates because they're incited to fear. So my advice is be you as loud as you can. Make everyone know who you are and where you come from. If they don't like it, they will get out of the way.
So there is a current, somewhat perhaps a new and emerging youth movement seeking to find voice, whether it's Black Lives or others. What was it unique about it then, and what's unique about now, the youth voice in movements?
As I suggested or stated before going on any sit-in or the Freedom Ride or any march, we prepared ourselves. When I was a student in Nashville, a college student, we studied for almost an entire school year. We had role playing, we had social drama, and we accepted the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence, as a way of life, as a way of living. That was some young people saying, you know, I cannot do it. I'm a member of the football team, I'm a big guy, I can't take it. I'm not going to let someone spit on me. But sometimes you have to become so disciplined for the sake of the movement itself. You become like a team. You become like a family, brothers and sisters. Today, I said to young people in the new movement, Black Lives Matter, some other groups, I said, study. Read the do's and don'ts in March. Study the early days of the civil rights movement. Read the literature, the books. Watch the videos. Listen to the speeches. You will learn something.
Let me just add something to the end of that. The reason I think youth movements are so important is because young people are more free than any of us. I think there's a reason that the sit-ins started with freshmen. Greensboro 4 were freshmen. John Lewis was a freshman. So the youth movement and youth movements as a whole are what can push us out of our comfort zone. These students aren't concerned about paying a mortgage. These students aren't concerned about what their parents say even, really, because they got out of the house. They are purely based on their ideals, and if we do our job right, we have taught them the values, the morals, and the ideals that will steer them in a direction that will make our whole country, our society, and hopefully our world a better place.
Let me try two more questions again, just in the interest of time. One, in the context of the 3 books of March, and both the examples shown and the lessons kind of lifted up, how would you contrast the overt racism of the 60s and the more covert racism of today? And are there different strategies given those realities?
During the late 50s, early 60s, it was clear, it was very visible. It was there. You saw the signs that said white only or colored only. You knew there were certain schools you could not attend. You couldn't eat. Restaurants. Couldn't sit at a lunch counter. Had to sit in the back of the bus. Couldn't go sit downstairs in the theater. So you knew it. It was overt. It was very visible. And you had organizations and groups like the Klan and others that did some mean and vicious things, like bombing homes and churches, synagogues, castrating people in my native state of Alabama. And people were afraid. People were afraid to go down to the courthouse and attempt to register to vote. They lived in fear. But we changed that. But we're not there yet. Even today, the scars and stains of racism are still deeply embedded in our society. So it's an ongoing struggle. And I said, when you have a member of Congress from the great state of South Carolina on the floor of the House, the President of the United States delivering a speech at a joint session of the Congress, say you lie. That says something about where we are. Would he have said that to a white person or only to a person of color? I've always said that you should respect the office even if not the man.
I think when you speak about dramatizing the situation, that's something I feel like over the process of working together, I've gained a much richer and more complete understanding of what it is to dramatize, what you're actually talking about. And I almost feel like it hit me the strongest watching you by surprise during the congressional sit-in, because I could. I was surprised. I was excited to ask you questions about it just a few days later because I was trying to work through the tactical and strategic thinking myself, and it seemed to me that by predicting, cameras and microphones being shut off, by predicting a certain outcome, which was negative, dramatizing the situation included anticipating that, shining a light on it, as you would say, making it plain, making it unconcealed for all to see. And so I feel like in 21st century American racism, with so much of it, but not all of it, being between the lines, being dog whistles, being code, I feel like, and this is, with the caveat, not being subject to it, but having it surround me nonetheless. I feel like a lot of the important work, and this is with the danger of sounding like I'm talking like, oh, this is growing pains. This is a good sign of a society progressing. But I feel like the kind of confrontation which makes people show their true colors by turning the covert into the overt is a sign of, tearing the wrapper off the present and seeing what's inside and dealing with what's inside the box. And so, as much as we don't want that box to be there in the first place, I feel like turning covert to overt is, in a twisted way, a step to confronting the problem directly. And I feel like, in a way, it is a very necessary step.
I think we just use money now. If you look, and we talk about it in Book 1 and Book 2, the Concerned White Citizens Council. It's like the businessman's Ku Klux Klan, right? And so things like access to capital, credit reports, interest rates, all of these things are now used. Right. The criminal justice system used against people, the drug war, all of these things which involve resources, your ability to pay to take care of yourself. But when you've deprived a people of the ability to build wealth for much of their existence in this country, then of course that's what you're going to get. And what frustrates me the most is our inability to admit it. Right? Who uses student loans the most? Students of color. All of these are built into our system. And to challenge that has become one of those ideas that people push back on the strongest. I'll leave it there.
Last question. Nate referenced some of the tensions that were in the middle of the movement around tactics, around strategy, etc. And one of them debated heavily in Book 3 was around white allies and their role. How did the kind of collective manage through that particular debate, and what would you say today about the role of non-African American allies in the movement?
We need it, we want it, whites and others to be as involved and be strong participants in the movement. That was in my old organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in the late 60s, said in effect that all white people should leave the organization and go and work in white communities, white neighborhood. I took the position as the chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that many of the people that bled with us were white, Asian American, some Native American, some Latinos, and that we cannot separate ourselves. In Mississippi, June 21st, 1964, the three young men, Goodman, Sherner, and Cheney, two whites, one African American, were arrested together, beaten together, murdered together. And you come to that point where you said we're going to separate people. White participants in the movement in the Deep South probably were singing out more during the Freedom Ride. I don't want to use the word in this company, but they called them in lovers. Mm-hmm. If you look at a picture of me and my white seatmate when we arrived in Montgomery, a young man named Jim Spurd, we were beaten, left bloody, unconscious. But this young man suffered because he was associated with those Negroes or with those colored people. He became one of us. So in a movement, I don't think you can separate people based on race and color.
Excellent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Andrew Aiden, Nate Powell, and of course, Congressman John Lewis.
You mentioned social media in your speech. What is your feeling about social media and how it is reaching our children and what it is reaching?
I think social media is a powerful instrument or tool to reach hundreds, thousands, and millions of people all over America and all around the world. If we had had social media during the 60s, during the sit-ins, the freedom rides, the marches, we probably would be much farther ahead as a nation and as a people.
Do you think that African Americans know enough about the internet to fight back? I mean, there was a drive by Jesse Jackson to do something about coding and all of that.
Well,
is this the time for that?
This is the time to see that more African American and other minorities is aware of the power of the internet. And we must do everything that we can to end discrimination when it comes to the internet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Wardell, and I work at the University of San Francisco. I oversee all the diversity and community engagement work, and really excited about bringing Congressman John Lewis here today.
So was this an effort on your part, the university's part, the student demand, the Times, what?
No, it was Cheryl Evans Davis who was the one who had said, Mary, I'm going to be bringing Congressman John Lewis to San Francisco. When I do, will you collaborate? And I said, absolutely. And so it was with her leadership and foresight and vision, and then me bringing in the University of San Francisco, I said, you have USF as a partner in this because he represents everything that the university stands for in our mission for equity and social justice.
Okay, so how do we use these graphic books or these comic books to change the habits?
Well, the good news is that we're already seeing leadership coming out of San Francisco. Specifically, our now outgoing superintendent of schools, Richard Carranza, has made sure, and the Board of Education, San Francisco Board of Education, has made sure that the San Francisco Unified School District, every school will be utilizing this in the social studies curriculum. And so San Francisco was already showing leadership in how these graphic novels could be a way to communicate these ideals of justice to younger generations, and also to tell the story of the civil rights in ways that I think has not been told before. To do it visually appealing, but also be able to connect with the very real social struggles that happened during that time in a way that is developmentally appropriate, but doesn't water down the story. And I think that that's what John Lewis and his collaborators, Andrew Iden, as well as Nate, the wonderful illustrator, have been able to do, to tell a new generation a story that is an American story.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What is your organization?
So I run Collective Impact. It's a program in the Western Addition based out of Ella Hill Hutch Community Center.
You are here listening to an icon talk about using comic books to teach history. How do you feel about that? Do you think that this is a new era, the time has really come for that?
I think it came a long time ago. I was a kindergarten teacher, a second grade, fourth grade teacher, and I've always been of the mind, if it gets them reading, then we want to put it in front of them. And I think that society is finally catching up with what actually is the reality of getting kids engaged in reading.
So what is your opinion about the impact of having these books available in the whole San Francisco school district?
I'm excited about the potential of it. I think yesterday we had some of the kids reading the books with a teacher, and if nothing else for historical context and relevance, one of the kids said, the teacher said, "Who learned something today? Tell me what you learned." And one kid raised his hand and he said, "Well, what I learned is John Lewis is amazing." And I'm like, even knowing that name is huge. We have a new way to teach young people and for them to learn history and to be excited about it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.